Thank you for joining us for another episode of Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence. We're a nonprofit membership organization dedicated to helping you streamline your RFP process through better education, smarter strategies, and more transparency. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive training, discounts to our virtual and in-person events, and the chance to connect with other procurement professionals throughout the year. And if you're planning a professional event or conference, don't forget our CP Speakers Bureau is available to speak at regional and national gatherings. Now let's get into today's session of Ask the RFP Doctor, where one of our expert RFP doctors will show you how to take on real-world challenges in procurement and supply chain management and break them down into practical strategies you can use right away.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about is in procurement and in our vendors, we see that many times there are lots of changes in terms of how we are seeing things change with our organizations, both in terms of our personnel, in terms of the folks that we work with. There's certainly a number of changes that are happening with them. So what we're going to talk about today is looking at these changes that are coming in the workforce, how these are affecting our vendors. And perhaps some of you all have seen some of the cases that we'll talk about here. And also we'll talk about, from a procurement standpoint, how do we onboard people more effectively as we start bringing on more people and as people get other opportunities elsewhere. And so that's really the focus of today, is how to deal with some of the changes that are coming up here. So some interesting statistics I wanted to first talk about, that maybe some of this is preaching to the choir, as it were, but certainly interesting. So here's some stats. The median job tenure here in the United States fell to 3.9 years. In other words, about 4 years till people on average will go to a different job. That's as of January, about a year and a half ago. The lowest since 2002. So people are changing jobs more often. The private sector tenure is 3.5 years, whereas public sector is 6.2 years. So why is that relevant for us? Is that as you work with vendors who are in the private sector, the turnover rate is even lower for those types of folks. So if you find somebody that you really like, based on the data, they may not always be there for the life of the contract. Workers aged 25 to 34, these are your not quite Gen Zers, but these are your millennials, young millennials, have a median tenure of only 2.7 years versus those that are 55 to 64, 9.6 years. So there's so many things we could talk about that, but there are different expectations as to what that looks like going forward. 11,000 people are turning 65 every single day. So 11,000 people reaching retirement age. Not everybody's retiring, but there's a lot of people that are reaching that age every single day. Other sectors, construction, 92% of firms are reporting difficulty finding open positions, and worker shortages, not finding the right people or enough people, is the number one cause project delays. And that comes from AGC, NCER, and ABC, and some other groups as well. And finally here, 46% of state and local governments say their retirement wave, their biggest retirement wave, is still ahead, and just over 2/3 of them don't have a succession plan in place. So the reason why I want to talk about this here, and my intent is not to have doom and gloom per se, but to recognize that yes, the pains you all are feeling in terms of finding people is very much commonplace, and frankly, over the next few years, it's only going to get more challenging. Okay, now I'm going to go through here and talk about some stats because I'm trying to get to the main point of what we're seeing is real, and we can kind of understand what that future is going to look like. Some other data. Since the year 2000, the US population has gotten older by about 3.9 years. And that is a huge number. Our population here in the United States and Canada is getting older, and not just older, but they're getting older faster, because there's so many people in the baby boomers that are now getting older, right? So we know we have an aging population. We also know that the birth rates have also dropped significantly. So the most recent data, this is actually out of date. This is from 2023. It takes a few years for the data to come out and get revised, but currently we're sitting at just over 1.5. The latest data I saw was about 1.5 births per woman. And so the replacement rate is 2.1 births per woman to maintain current population levels, and we are below that. So it's expected in the next 10 to 15 years, the total nominal population in the United States is going to start dropping, barring immigration. That's a different thing here. But the point is that there are fewer births happening. The population is going to shrink, and as a population decreases because of births, boomers, as they retire, are still going to be around. And so we have fewer people coming up behind them to replace the positions that demand to fill the current needs here. So the whole workforce struggle things that we're seeing now today are challenging. And over the next 15 to 20 years, it's only going to get more challenging as we look at that. So another way to kind of illustrate this, this is total number of births. Again, this is just US data. Boomers, the parents of boomers, anybody know who the parents are, what generation of the boomers are? Use kind of use interesting information. Their parents are the silent generation, right? So it's a silent generation. Yep, very good. Thank you, Kate. So 76 to 79 million boomers were born. So if you apply your 2.1 births per woman, that means for millennials, which are the children of boomers on average, are currently 72 million. So it should have been about 83 million or so. So we're about 10 million short just to maintain current population levels, right? Okay, so up next here then, we have the greatest generation. Those are the World War II vets and folks. Their children are Gen Xers, and there's about 65 million Gen Xers that were born. Okay. The children of the Xers are the Gen Zers, and these are the folks that are now coming into the workforce. And there is about 69 million. So we had a broke even or a slight increase based on Gen X. And the last thing I'm going to show you here is Generation Alpha, Gen Alpha. Gen Alpha are the children of millennials. These are the current kids that are in high school, in very early stages of college, and they will be entering the workforce en masse in the next 3 to 5 years. Now, before I show you this number here, one thing I want you to understand is that these numbers, this is set in stone. This is not going to adjust over time. This number is not going to go up. This is the number because that's how population demographics work. So millennials, 72 million. If we apply our 2.1 number for births, Gen Alpha, we should have had what, about 70 million or so. The current number, Gen Alpha, 45 million. So we are seeing a huge decrease in population. Gen Beta, these are the really young kids. Not sure yet. They're currently being born, and there's a number of reasons for that. Number of questions here. I see one, how does the wave of internet influencers as a career affect the pool of workers? Oh, Renee, there are so many comments about that. There's certainly a lot of effects about why that is. I think that does have an impact, but the point is that we are seeing a far fewer people being born. Now, the question here is like, does the reason for that decline in population births affect how we deal with that? In my supposition, I propose no. The cause of what that is, which there are many, and what we're seeing here are separate things here. The reality is that here in procurement and here professionally in the workforce, there's going to be fewer people in the future. And that's going to make our ability to respond to that and respond to that. Now, as was pointed out by Stella, AI is going to help some of the impact. It's not going to fix everything, but honestly, folks, thank goodness AI is here to help brunt the impact of some of these things that we're going to have. And I'm actually going to talk about that a little bit more here. So I've gone through all these statistics to try to set the stage to maybe ask some other questions about, are any of the following situations familiar? Have you, perhaps seen this before? So if you have a contract that runs, let's say 12 months, what's the likelihood that that person, that key person from the vendor side, is still going to be on that contract at the very end? And the reality is not very likely, right? In fact, we had a project once where the key person from the vendor, they were fantastic. This is working with the owner. The vendor's PM was fantastic. They got a huge contract down the road here several months after our contract started, and they got sucked up into this other job and they left. All right, they went to somewhere else. We see that all the time. Have you seen this? And certainly, I would guess is yes. Or the vendor gets a new project and, like I just said, they pull your PM on the job, or maybe someone gets a huge job offer and goes somewhere else, right? So many times promotions are that common trigger. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword of when we hire really good people. So mediocre and even high performers get promoted within 1 to 2 years of a project starting, and nobody poaches the weak ones because nobody wants to work with them, right? So if we have really good people, the reality of the situation is that that person is likely to be gone to somewhere else within a year or two. And depending on the length of our procurement, our project, they may not be around for the entire duration of that situation. Okay. Here's another example. This is a very large, is actually a construction job. I think budget was around $300 to $400 million, building out an airport and some other systems related to that. And it's really, really interesting. So in fact, Renee's comment here is what I'm going to talk about now. As of today, these are the current ages of the key people on the project. And this data is like hot off the press here. Age is 39 years old. The PM is 33. There's a couple other people that support that person, 29, 32, 31, and 46. So these are the ages of everybody on that job as of today. 3 years ago, the same contractors, same projects, not done yet, same everything, literally is everything the same except for the people 3 years ago, same job. Look at these differences. The key sponsor from the vendor side, 59. The PM, 48. Construction manager, 47, 47, 43, 41. So this person here just got older, but everybody else has been switched out. And if you look at these differences here and look at the mathematics of this, what we're seeing is that in a space of 3 years, we're losing 10 to 15, 20 years of experience within 3 years. Now, there's a whole bunch of other things here too that we can talk about is that what I don't show in here is that this is the key person for the contractor, the key sponsor. Over here, they were 59. Over here, this person, he is 39. On the vendor side, excuse me, on the owner side, the key project manager from the city, that person is, I think they are 59 or 60. So you have a situation now that if I'm a 60-year-old, can I work with a 59-year-old? And the answer is certainly yes. They have similar life experiences, backgrounds, and so forth. Can a 59-year-old work with a 39-year-old? They can, but there are different stations in life, right? The 59-year-old gets off work and they go to play golf. The 39-year-old gets off work and they go pick up kids from daycare. They run to soccer games. Who knows what they do? The point is that there's a lot of differences when you have these different levels of experience, and that affects how we work together inside of the organization. Now, folks, I am driving to how this affects us as procurement, what we're doing here. But one of the main things here I want to take away with this is that there's a limited pool of expertise that we as people that hire contractors, we know that there's a limited availability of people that can do the work that needs to be done, especially high performers. There's only so many expert people out there. And so because of that, the key takeaway is that clients, buyers, contractors, suppliers, everybody, we're all in competition with each other for the same limited pool of skilled personnel. If I have a very complicated project and I need somebody really proficient to do that, there's not a lot of people out there that are available to do that. And so what I need to do is when I think about this as an owner, as a procurement agency, is that I need to make sure I position myself as a client of choice. I want to make sure that as we position our RFPs, as our solicitations, as we offer debriefings, as we think about our selection criteria, I want to do everything I can to attract the top performers to work on our projects. Because there's not enough people, as we just saw with the demographic data, there's even fewer people available into the future. So what can we do about it? We have been working in this space for many, many years, 20 plus years. And the answer, what we have found is always, and has always been, is to focus on the people that we're selecting, not on the marketing documents that we might be looking at. Now, certainly, I think we'd all agree, oh, yeah, that's true. Yes, we agree with that. But it's always been true. And I would submit here that it's even more true today or more pertinent today because of the changes that we're seeing here, right? So when you think about why this is such a big deal, if we work backwards and think about why this requires accountability, is that a high-performing project requires that accountability. And accountability requires measurement. And measurement requires a plan that we can actually measure against. So we have to have a plan that we can measure against. The reason why that's so important here is that as people change and as they shift over, which we know for sure is going to happen, having a clear expectation about what we're going to do on the project is of paramount importance. The way we do this then is to extract the expertise or the insights of these expert people as part of our clarification or negotiation process with these vendors as we're getting ready to sign a contract. That's the key of all of this. We want to, as best we can, extract what they know and how they're going to deliver the project, put some metrics behind that, and embed that into our plan in terms of how we're going to actually get that project done. Okay. And again, like I said, measure against the plan. Everyone on this call has, contract language that says, well, if somebody leaves, I get a resume and I get veto rights or whoever is going to replace them on the project. Everybody has access to that. If you see that happen, you have access to that. That's not what makes us different here, right? What the difference here is that as we move forward, as we know this is going to start happening more and more often of people changing, is we've got to have a plan to actually lay out what we're going to do and respond to that. Now, we do actually have an RFP session from actually last month, I think it was, or maybe 2 months ago. We walk through in detail how do we negotiate and clarify some of the details about what we're going to do responding to a difficult situation. So this is actually presented by a former chief procurement officer at the state of Alaska, and he walks through their experiences with understanding and clarifying how to put that plan in place and actually something we can measure against as we go forward here. So check that out. A lot of good insights, but that's the key takeaway here as when we look at this. So the impact is that when we start doing these things, is that we know that the plan exists, so the vendor is incentivized to send their next best person to live up to what that plan because we have a documentation and we know what's going to happen. The other thing that we've also seen across thousands of procurements our team has been involved with here is that the high performers prefer this approach, right? You've become a client of choice. So by way of example, two examples I can think. We had an IT job with the city where we had a fantastic project manager. They laid out the whole plan. They got an opportunity. They actually got promoted on a different job here, but because they had a plan, this person ended up staying working on our job because not as much as involved as they initially were planning on doing, but they're still heavily involved because of what was meant to work out here. That example I mentioned earlier, where there is a client, this vendor had won a huge job just up the road. That person, they ended up having somebody else come in where they turns out they worked it out with this other big client, and they were able to get the details of that setup here. There's another project that we worked on where this is a university where a very highly complex design construction job, and they had a full bench of basically two people for each of the key positions. When they were doing their interviews, they identified, well, give us your two project managers, two design leads, and one other position. I think the superintendent of these key people, because they knew that people were actually going to turn over. And actually, on that particular job where they had all this bench, these people on the bench here, two of the key people on the team, both they had heart attacks actually. Really kind of sad. They didn't die, but they were not able to work anymore. So again, whether people get promoted, whether they have heart attacks or win the lottery, we're not going to be able to stop that from happening. But knowing this is going to happen and planning for that is a key part of what we're going to do. The other piece to this too that we're not going to talk about today too much, but is collaboration. One thing we're seeing is that when we look at the new workforce coming out, these Gen Zers, is that there is a very strong motivation to have collaboration. The idea that I'm a lone wolf and I'm going to do things on my own, just get it done and take care of it. We're seeing that's not as effective, right? And it's really a big deal. And as Renee, I love what you said, right? If I get abducted by aliens, we need to have a plan in place, and that's exactly right. So we definitely want to think about that and have a response to what we're going to do with that. Okay, now let's talk about though. That's from the vendor side of things. The key with the vendors is hire the right people. Attend one of our NASPO classes, Better RFPs, Better Projects. We talk about that extensively, but hire the right people and then put a plan in place that explains here's how they're going to deliver the project, and they have measurements that are tied to that plan. That's how we respond to and deal with the vendor side of things. We can't stop people from leaving, but we can plan for it. Now, let's talk about in-house for a minute, our own procurement staff, because just as the vendors are facing these issues in terms of workforce turnover, we're also seeing that on our side. So, a couple of examples. We work with a city who shall remain nameless, but on the East Coast. Their staffing was at 50% procurement staffing levels. And what they had. So they didn't have enough people. They're at 50% capacity. A couple of years ago, the infrastructure bills got passed, and they literally had twice the spend and four times the workload. They didn't have enough people in the first place. So stress levels go which way, up or down? Through the roof here, more work, more money, more efforts, and they didn't have enough people. Right? It's a very challenging circumstance. If you're a procurement leader, this is the reality we have to face here. Another example, we work with a city on the West Coast. They had 50 procurement FTEs, a very large city, very large staff of procurement folks. That 50 FTEs allotted to them. They got a bump to 75 FTEs, so they got authorized, they got additional funding from the council, city council, to hire more procurement folks. So up to 75 FTEs. But here's the thing. They couldn't even fill their original allotment of FTEs. I think they had like 39 or 40 FTEs, and they got allotments for even more people. So it's not like we just, well, we need more people. And there's a difference between allotting more people and finding people to fill those seats here. Okay. Now, the other thing we're thinking about this too is, when we think about the data digest, this is actually a survey that CPE does. We did this back in May, actually. We asked you all, what are your current staffing levels and current stress levels related to this? And 2/3 of you all, these are procurement friends and CP friends, said that they're currently understaffed. 6% of folks said that they're severely understaffed, and the mean stress level is 6.1 out of 10. But look at this in terms of the overall staffing levels. Yeah, there's a number of people that are only a little bit understaffed or doing okay, but there's a whole lot of people on the upper end here that are having major staff shortages. Now, on the East Coast, with some of the changes at the federal level and procurement folks and other type federal employees being let go, some of those folks are transitioning to local governments, and the impact of that has been a little bit blunted because of that. But that's not the case. It's very regional. And the point is that we know there's major staffing shortages. So the question is like, yeah, I know this is kind of doom and gloom. There's a lot of data that says things are challenging or frustrating. We get that. But the question here is, well, what do we do about that? And the way I thought about how to respond to that or how to think about that is to first focus on, or primarily focus on, what does our new workforce look like? How do they think, and how do we help them be successful? And frankly, is how, as an organization, to respond to these changes as they happen. So I want to spend just a few minutes here to talk about what our new workers, our Gen Zers, look like, how they think, and what we can do to help them be successful. Now, very brief history lesson here. Boomerisms. Now, this is not it's not meant to be an offensive term at all here, but it's resulting or describing things that have happened over the last 30 years that we see in our current some of our leadership structures. So a boomerism is something that came about as an expectation of what happened in the 1980s, 1990s, and the early 2000s, meaning that we had all these boomers that graduated high school, went to college, and now enter the workforce. In fact, there's so many of them, there was more people than those that are actually able to find jobs. So there's more people than jobs available. As a result of that, what that means here that if I was a boomer in 80s or 90s and I was able to get a job, the question then is like, well, how much are they willing to do to keep that job? Are they willing to move across the country because they got a job when a lot of their friends don't have jobs? Yes, absolutely. Are they willing to work late, come in early, put in the extra effort? The answer is yes, because one would argue that because they're so thankful to have a job, they're willing to go the extra mile. In today's context, there are more jobs than people available. So as a young person that is coming out into the workforce, again, it depends on sector, but generally speaking, that there's a lot more flexibility, a lot more freedom for where this worker wants to go. So the need to stay late, the need to come early, the need to put in the extra effort is perhaps not as strong because of the current workforce environment that we find ourselves in. Now, there's other reasons for that too, but that's kind of the context for where we find ourselves. So those are boomerisms. Boomerism is I did this, so you, young person, also need to do this because I had to do it. And whether we like it or not, again, I'm not trying to express an opinion here, but that's the reality that we frankly find ourselves here. So the last thing here is that our procurement and contracting models, in my opinion, assume that we have enough available skilled workforce, a stable supply chain, and stable pricing. And those assumptions, in my opinion, are no longer valid, right? So I just look at the chat here, right, Renee? Are we all supposed to suffer? Yes, apparently, but maybe not, right? So anyways, it's kind of mess, right? So our current contracting processes don't actually allow us to respond to what we're seeing in today's market, right? So part of the things I have, in fact, my PhD dissertation was looking at the Great Recession of 2008 and how that affected the construction industry. And I could talk a whole lot about that. It was very, very interesting. But one of the things that came out with that is that when the recession, and show of hands here, how many of you remember the recession in 2008? One of the things that happened because of that recession is it artificially extended the amount of time that people stayed in the workforce. So boomers maybe want to retire earlier than they wanted to, or other folks ahead of them, but couldn't because of the impact on retirement accounts that the recession had. The reason why that is so impactful is that many times these most productive employees, these are folks that are older than 55 that have seen and have a lot of expertise, they masked the productivity gaps that we see in the younger generation because of lack of experience and for other reasons. But because we had this older group of people that stayed in the workforce longer, it didn't truly reveal the productivity impacts that we're seeing today because of that. Very interesting. Now, when you think about the Gen Zers, these are my current college students. They're getting ready to graduate, and they will all come start working for you soon. Here's what we're kind of seeing. This is not our data. We've looked at many, many studies, and this is just some of the quick highlights for what we're seeing with this. 80% prefer a flexible or hybrid work schedule. If your organization has everybody shall be in the office 5 days a week, it's not going to fly for the new workers. Again, I'm not expressing whether that's good or bad. I'm just telling you those are the expectations. 30% prefer a fully remote environment. 90% prefer or want to prioritize mental health conversations at work. I expect promotion within 18 months. This one is shocking to me. 70% of respondents, these are Gen Z people, want to get promoted within 18 months. Again, I'm not saying that's good or bad, but I'm saying in fact, I have a friend, he is a project manager, and his son just started working for somebody else. He has been there for 6 months, and he was talking to my friend and telling his dad, like, look, Dad, I'm not happy here. I've been there for 6 months. I've not been promoted, and I'm just really frustrated. Like that's so different the expectation that we're kind of seeing today, right? So that's kind of what it looks like. In terms of other stats here, and the reason why I'm tying this to how to respond to this as procurement leaders is what we need to do with that, right? 93% respondents in terms of what their motivators are for work is to have a positive impact on society. 70% work-life balance, want to make sure that's an important thing here. And the other thing that I also thought was interesting that 80%, and this particular statistic, this came out 6 weeks ago. So I mean, this is not old data. 79% of Gen Zers want to get a job that is focused on helping other people. Now we might say to ourselves, well, I'm procurement, I write RFPs. That doesn't help people. And I would disagree, folks. We have to think about how we reimagine what we do in procurement in a way that explains what we do in public procurement or whatever type of agency you are in, what we do really makes an impact for our world. It makes an impact for society, and we have to think about what we're going to do and how we respond to that. Drivers of happiness, do something interesting. Think about what's important. And again, there's a lot of other data that talks about that as well here. The other thing that also makes these folks unique is that there's a number of mental health challenges for many reasons. Screen time access. They are the first fully digital generation of folks. different expectations in terms of growing up. Again, I could spend a whole hour just talking about that. But the reality is here is that a lot of Gen Zers are trying to navigate their way in the world, and there's a lot of concern or angst about, what that might look like. So these are the folks that are coming out into our workforce. So the question then is, well, what do we do what do we do with that as procurement professionals responding to what we're seeing here, right? So again, we know that we can't stop people from leaving, but we can make it easier for people to stay where we're at. So we can't stop recruiters from opening seats elsewhere, other opportunities. But what we can do is make sure that people want to stay within our organizations. The other thing we can also see here is to provide effective mentorship and feedback to these younger people. What I have seen is that having one-on-one meetings, especially with these younger people, and to give them specific steps here about how to be successful, how to do things, is really beneficial. So for example, one thing I do is I teach it's called Means and Methods. It's a sophomore level college class that I teach. And it teaches about how to build things in construction, and it's means and methods, how to do things. Part of what I do in this class here is I have my students interview contractors. And I have them go out in groups of 3 or 4. They'll go to the contractor job site, talk to them, prepare a presentation about what they learned in that particular trade. I have seen a change over the last 2 years where these folks here is like, well, in fact, I remember last 2 semesters, I've not seen this before. They come to me and say, Dr. Smithwick, we've been trying to get our interview scheduled, but nobody's responded to us. So, okay, that's fine. People are busy. Did you call them? It's like, oh, no, no, no. We sent an email and that's all we did. Well, guys, you have to, pick up the phone. You have to call these people because everybody's busy. So part of what I've been doing here now is talk about how do you make phone calls? How do you send professional follow-up emails? How do you talk to folks in group settings? I mean, a lot of these Gen Zers were affected by COVID, and they spend a lot of time in isolation, not having those social group dynamics that make things challenging, right? So we're talking about how to work in group settings here, and these are the folks that we're kind of seeing that. So because of that, what we're seeing here is that Gen Z and soon Gen Alpha, they learn differently compared to other generations. And if you find yourself in a procurement leadership position, knowing that these new people learn differently compared to everybody else, we have to acknowledge that and respond to it. What they really want is step-by-step, video-based, do-it-yourself, YouTube-style training and education. And I have some examples here coming up in a minute, but that's what these folks are like explainer videos. Anybody seen like an explainer about how to do something? That's what we need to do in terms of procurement. So the old school onboarding model, you may have been something along the lines of copy an old solicitation, paste it, crash, and burn, and hopefully it all works out okay, right? Again, being a little bit facetious here, but many times that we do is we'll find an old RFP, copy it, and hopefully everything works out, right? That's option one. Option two is to do what? Sit outside the boss's office and hopefully they can help us figure things out. My opinion is that going forward, neither of these options is going to be successful because of so many different reasons. For option one, AI can help fix some of that, but it's not going to fix everything. And option two is that the bosses, the leadership are so busy for lots of reasons that they're not going to have time to do this. So what do we do about that, right? So what's our new playbook? So what our suggestions are is a couple of things. I would think about your solicitation process or RFP process and think about the cradle to grave steps for running an RFP and chunk that out into different pieces. Write the scope of work, set the evaluation criteria, set the pre-bid meeting, follow with the contractors, how to answer questions. Think about the major sections that are involved with writing and running your RFP process and put this down in a document that people can understand what they're going to do. Think of it like writing a syllabus for a class. Write a syllabus for how to run your solicitations. The second thing here I would do is make a short video. And folks, when I take short, I mean short, like less than 10 minutes, 10 minutes or less. A tool or template, some sort of checklist that walks through and explains, here's how we do these different parts of what we're looking at, right? So a 10-minute video on how to run like a pre-bid meeting combined with a template for that pre-bid meeting like slide deck, amazing, super helpful, okay? The other thing you also do is that as you develop this content is branded to your organization, your logos, your language, mapped to your policies. So one thing that our team has been working on recently is to develop these examples, these actual training modules for different procurement groups. And I've got a couple screenshots here, but state of Iowa, South Dakota, Louisiana, some other agencies, some cities, and we've gone in there and created a whole module in these short, explainer videos styles that are really helpful for these younger people, right? The other thing too is that you want this content to be evergreen. So as you think about this, I know we work in procurement. What I'm talking about though is creating a training platform, a resource hub for these new hires that are coming in, because without that, it's going to make it really challenging. The other thing we're going to do too, and this is the big one, is to standardize everything you do for your organization. So one way you can do that is to think about your evaluation criteria and set it in stone. This idea that we need to change our evaluation criteria on every single RFP is madness. We need to stop that. Now, attend our classes. We'll talk about this extensively, but the reason why I say that is that if we spend less time focusing on what our evaluation criteria are and more focus on what the scope of work is and what our frustrations are, that's the better effort. Not trying to figure out the perfect evaluation criteria. Let's standardize that, leave it in place here, and get that done. Stop writing source selection plans from scratch. Have a template. All you're doing is updating the schedule and maybe the point allocations, and that's basically it. Again, make it consistent, make it easy for people to go through this and understand what's happening. Now, I'm going to take a minute here and talk about just very briefly, because a couple of folks are asking and commenting about AI in the future, because that is certainly going to have a huge impact. So we know that vendors are already using AI to write proposals. And if you're not convinced of that, look at your recent proposals, folks. I guarantee that 90% of the proposal content you're looking at is written by AI. Okay. So if you're asking for huge, page counts in your submittals, that's fine because AI is going to write it all. It literally doesn't make a difference here. It's what's becoming though is that written proposals are a waste of time for your evaluators because now it's all AI generated, doesn't really help us. And also it's frankly a waste of time for our vendors, or I should say it's less time that they're not thinking about what our project is, right? So asking for less, like less pages, less content, less information isn't lowering the bar. It's actually making the evaluation process easier and more efficient. The other thing here too is that in the future, our expectation within the next 5 years or so, or even less, is that many of the routine things that we do in procurement, such as PO tracking, invoicing, administrative RFIs, things like that, a lot of that is going to be automated by AI systems. And so what this happens here now is that as these routine tasks get automated, these administrative tasks get taken over by AI, what that leaves here is that the high judgment, most difficult things that we have to do as procurement professionals is all that's left for us to think about. And I would say that's an amazing opportunity in the future. Is when we think about how we reframe ourselves as procurement professionals, is that we are the purveyors of trust in our organizations. In fact, we have a whole hour-long discussion looking at trust for our organizations, but the idea is that as trust becomes harder to come by, that we have less trust in our vendors' ability to do things, less trust in capabilities of folks and whatnot, trust is going to be even more important. And I would argue that the main role that procurement does is help to validate and verify that we can trust the vendors that we're hiring. That's how I think of how we reframe vendors in the future. Reframe procurement in the future is that purveyors of trust. So a couple examples of what this has looked like. So you can see here for Iowa, we created a number of training sessions, various assessments. We have all these modules about different content about procurement, buying basics. All of this is tailored, customized directly for the target agency. This is, I think, the state of Louisiana, South Dakota, writing scopes of work, current conditions. We have different roles of folks that are involved with that. And the point is that when you get all this done and put this together, we now have a training platform for folks that can make this better and more efficient, right? So it's really, really quite interesting as we think about what's happening going forward this year. So, final thoughts here about this is that we can't prevent the churn. We know it's going to happen, but we can't stop that. So what we can do though is plan for it. We know that we have a new crop of people coming in. They learn differently, and because of that, we have to modify our procurement processes to be faster, more efficient, and to get that done. On the vendor side of things, again, we know that people are also going to leave, but focus our evaluation process on the people involved delivering those services. Combine that with a plan and a measurement against that plan is how we get that done. This is great. I see all the commentary about current lingo. I would tell you I have some young kids myself. 6, 7 was a thing for a while. Thankfully, it has started to go away, which is it's been really good. If you don't know what that is, don't bother looking it up. It is ridiculous. But anyways, all right. What else we got? Will the insurance session include cybersecurity? Um, Maybe we haven't thought about that, but I will make a note of that. It was mostly focused on how insurance requirements are changing, in terms of what the companies are willing to insure, what those bond limits are. We're also going to talk about that. Sometimes we've seen agencies have very stringent insurance requirements, and we'll talk about how that affects smaller vendors, their ability to actually be successful and propose on those types of projects. But I will make a note of that, and we'll see if we can't get some insights as to cybersecurity as well. Jennifer, do you have a class about CMR and GMPs? Yes. I don't know the date, but we do have a class coming about alternate delivery in construction, SEMA risk, progressive design build. We have a whole series about that we'll do. We actually gave a class. This was in Capo. Capo is based out of California. We had a whole day session about alternate delivery. From a procurement standpoint, we had workshops. We had how to work through those RFP processes. So if that's something interested on site, Jennifer, reach out to me. I'd be glad to chat with you further about that. But I think we'll have an RFP doctor session too, about some of that as well. The required questions, those are on the website. So let me take a pause here. We can walk through that a little bit, and we'll get that set up. How do I turn off recording so I can answer y'all's questions? There we go. Dates here. This is in August. It's basically every Wednesday of August at I think is 1 p.m. Eastern. I forget the exact schedule, but that is on NASPO's website. September we'll do our 1, 2, 3s, a great scoring matrix, and in October we'll do our deep dive on effective evaluations. And then finally here is that we'll have some new topics coming for our RFP doctors. We've got all of our topics set from now until the end of 2027. So some things that we'll be talking about are our procurement trust series. So be sure to check that out. Somebody had mentioned last time, I think, about looking at insurance and what change we're seeing from an insurance requirements. We actually are going to do a session about that, and anyway, some other topics as well. So be sure to check those out.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.